Hello and welcome to Good Game, the show for gamers by gamers. I'm Bajo.
And I'm Junglist. This week we'll be bringing you our interview with possibly the most celebrated game designer of them all, Mr. Will Wright. He's responsible for such games as SimCity, The Sims, and now he's putting the finishing touches on his latest Spore.
In Spore, I want people to confront a lot of these kind of larger issues, larger than their life, type of thing when you're laying, on a summer night, looking up at the stars, everybody's mind kind of trips across these interesting questions.
We'll also be reviewing the cooperative shooter Army of Two and tiny turn-based tactics for the DS with Advance Wars Days of Ruin.
The Good Game project is now open, and we're looking for your ideas about the game we should be making. We asked some of the leading developers for some tips and ideas on how to kick things off.
One of the exercises I like to do is to actually set some boundaries and say, okay, we're going to make a game with no guns. How can we make that interesting?
But first, can you guess the game for this week? It was a classic back in the arcade days. Answer at the end of the show, but for now, Bajo, I will go read the news.
Go and do that, Junglist.
Good game! Iron Lore Entertainment, the creators of the Titan Quest series and the co-developer of the recently released Dawn of War Soulstorm, have closed their doors for the last time. The game developer, which was established in 2000, regretfully closed down their operations in late February, citing a lack of investment to fund their next project as the reason for the closure. In response to the shutdown, Michael Fitch, the director of THQ, Iron Lore's publisher, has blamed software piracy for the lack of funds. Mr. Fitch added that if only a fraction of people who had pirated Titan Quest had paid for it, then Iron Lore could be in a very different situation. Official support for Netscape Navigator has been discontinued this week, with parent company AOL Incorporated pulling the plug on the veteran web browser. Netscape was founded in 1994 and was once the most popular internet browser in the world, a title that it lost to Microsoft's Internet Explorer in the late 90s. The Netscape company was bought out by AOL in 1999, but it never regained its former market share. AOL have announced that their transition to an advertising-supported web business has left no room for the kind of investment that Netscape Navigator requires, and that no further updates will be brought to the program.
And now back to the old school days of war, where both sides settle disagreements in a gentlemanly manner by fighting it out with toy soldiers and taking turns. I speak, of course, of Advance Wars Dark Conflict, the latest turn-based tactic game to hit the Nintendo DS.
But don't let the cartoon tanks fool you. Underneath the childish exterior lies ferociously addictive depth and tons of replay value. It's also a lot darker than the last Advance Wars. All the old characters and armies are dead, and the whole feel of this one is very grim.
You'll need to gather what forces you can in this new wasteland and save survivors from savage tribes straight out of Mad Max. Controlling cities will gain you funds, which you can then use in factories to spend on war machines.
Everything from tanks to missiles to submarines to stealth bombers fall under your command, and they each have their own counters, but that's just one layer of depth. On top of that, every square of terrain does something different. Forests can hide your troops, and if you crawl to the top of mountains, you can see farther, and you'd be wise to pay attention to choke points.
Throw in additional elements like fuel, ammunition, range, and stealth, and you've got a lot to think about each turn. Unlike the last Advance Wars, superpowers given to commanders are negligible. And it's a matter of taste, John, but I always thought the superpowers are what differentiated the generals.
I was also a bit concerned about the pace of the game. I mean, some matches can last upwards of 2 hours, and you kind of feel like, if I could have wrapped that up like 1 hour ago, that would have been great. But you can edit a lot of the options in skirmish mode, and you can even make your own maps if you want a smaller game.
Which is the main new feature. Not only can you edit maps and use them in multiplayer, but you can also upload them online or download other people's maps.
It's a smart move, and I think we're going to see this type of feature in a lot more games because it gives power to the player.
Yeah, this kind of user-generated experience we're seeing a lot more of now, Jung. Like Halo 3's Forge or what we'll see in Little Big Planet. But Gary's mod really did it the best, I think.
Absolutely, but you're going to need 2 copies of the game for local multiplayer. There's no download play. Final thoughts?
Well, if you've already got Advance Wars, this might feel more like an expansion. I mean, besides a few new units and terrain features, the map editor really is the only new thing. So it's up to you if you want to head back into the fight. 7.5 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, I agree. Advance Wars veterans might not feel like they're getting another full game here, but they've perfected their little fighting system so much that you can just play it over and over. Slow-paced, but very enjoyable. I'm giving it 8 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Hello, tribal leader.
Welcome, underling. How was your journey? Did you find true happiness and see your spirit guide?
I have a shame to tell you, tribal leader.
What did you do, underling?
I use shortcut to get to end of spiritual journey faster. But now I feel like journey was not worth it.
Underling, after all this time, you still much to learn. Cheating to get to end of journey does not make journey worthwhile. Enjoy your time, for all things must end. Getting there is the fun.
I did see my spirit guide though, tribal leader.
What animal was it?
Giant yellow monkey. Is that bad?
Yes.
The Good Game Game project is now open and awaiting your ideas.
Now, most of us aren't game designers, well, not yet anyway, so we thought we'd ask some of the professional developers we met at the recent Game Developers Conference for some pointers on how to get started.
At the moment, everyone's really excited about this, and they're coming up with ideas for what sort of weapon you should have and what sort of clothes they should wear and how many double jumps they can do, all that kind of crazy stuff. Is that where we should be starting?
Well, I think that you go about designing games in a couple of ways. One way is to sort of start with a proven genre, right? So maybe we're going to have an action game and we're going to have a character with a gun or a number of guns and all sorts of different attachments for his guns, you know. Or you could actually go about it from what I would call a more interesting perspective, where you are trying to define a player experience, right? And from the ground up, and maybe come up with something a little bit more unique.
First thing is, ask yourself what sort of game you are going to make. If it's going to be a game that's we're going to make a better version of, that's fair enough. You can do that. But I think it's more exciting and more interesting to say, we're going to do this. And this could be a very simple thing. And this, I would suggest to you, should be something that hasn't been done before. Now, maybe that is the idea, maybe it's the concept, maybe it's the story, I don't know what it is, but some element of what you're making that you haven't seen before is much, much more exciting than having something that you have, a better version of something you've already seen before.
Always the hardest part about the idea stage of creating a game is culling out the stuff that doesn't belong in the game. It's the tightening up of the idea. It's very easy, particularly when you work with large creative teams, that everybody has hundreds of ideas, and it's always very tempting to take all those ideas and try to pack everything into one game. And I've always found the very best games contain one or two or three really good ideas that are just sort of put in and polished and obsessed over until they're nice and tight. And then there's little bits of flavour added around the edge of that. And figuring out what the two or three core ideas that make the game, that's the hard bit.
Are you still there? Uh-oh.
We're in the process of making our own game with our audience. Is there any advice you could give us?
I think the hard part is going to be that as you get more and more people involved, it's going to push you more towards kind of known areas. And so you're probably, if you ask everybody what they want, it's going to end up being a first-person shooter or something with an odd theme. Maybe it's pizzas instead of guns. I don't know.
One of the exercises I like to do is to actually set some boundaries and say, okay, we're going to make a game with no guns. How can we make that interesting, okay? Or we're going to make a game where the main character can't see. I mean, just coming up with like exercises for yourself that change your point of view, then you will actually, I think, send yourself down a different path and come up with some interesting results.
Are there any common mistakes that people make in this idea kind of phase when you're coming up with an idea?
The biggest mistake is having an idea that's just too big. So it's important to keep an idea that's simple and that you know that you're very aware of what the core of the idea is, because as you go along, no matter how big or small your production is, there's going to be cuts and changes. But if you have that initial central idea, if you know what the focus of the player experience or the mechanic you're going for, whatever it is you want to focus on, just if you keep that in mind, then you'll get the game that you want to make.
When you have choices, always choose the simplest path. because that is 9 times out of 10, that is the right path. And many times in my past career, I've made the fatal mistake of mistaking complexity for being good. And just adding another feature just for the sake of adding another feature. So just pick one simple idea that you haven't seen before, it can be the most simplest thing in the world, and shine that idea brighter than anything you've seen.
The classic mistakes is just being too ambitious. Ambition is a great thing, but paring it back to something that is realistic and that is still, at its core, a lot of fun, that's really where the whole trick of this making a good game lies.
Sound advice, hey, Jung?
Yeah, you know, what I take from that is that it's really just all about coming up with that one original mechanic or concept and then keeping it simple and moving on from there.
Well, we hope you've been inspired to get involved, so hit up our website for more information on how you can submit your ideas. There's also prizes up for grabs and a couple of mentorships to work with the pro developer on this project.
But for now, here's Gamer Tonight.
Within the various gaming communities, cheaters or hackers are looked down on with great dislike. These people get a kick out of ruining the game experience for everyone, be it walking through walls or displays of superhuman ability. Ooh, they're looked down on as the lowest of low of all gamers. Joining us tonight is Kevin Freaker, a notorious hacker.
It's about time you interviewed someone of my prowess.
Yeah, but what's with the goofy cyberpunk mask?
I'll let you know that this goofy mask allows me to implement my hacks into RL.
What? That's impossible.
Oh, really? You can't tolerate people more arrogant than yourself. Your favorite color is blue, your middle name is Jonathan, and you wear sporty white underwear.
I don't know what's more disturbing, the fact that you knew all that or the fact that you were wall hacking through my pants.
I'm sorry, it's just that this version doesn't have a pants filter.
So why exactly do you cheat?
Well, I just love the sound of kids whining about the unfair circumstances.
Enemy spotted.
Shot.
Hacksaws win.
Do you often get accused of hacking?
Yeah, like all the time. I mean, just the other day I was playing Call of Duty 4 and I called for pterodactyl support. Then these kids were all... What the... You can't do that!
So, Kevin, could you show me one of those real-life hacks?
I thought you'd never ask. Initiating wall hack systems.
Oh yeah, those guys! You know, they've been really anxious to talk to you ever since you got here.
Oh, hey, well, would you look at the time? Oh, goodness, I gotta go, bye.
Good game!
Well, when we were given the chance to interview the one and only Will Wright, we packed our bags
you did.
I packed my bag and headed to San Francisco, where he's putting the finishing touches on his latest game, Spore.
Will Wright is responsible for some of the most popular games of all time, including The Sims and SimCity, games credited with bringing gaming to a mass audience.
Will Wright, welcome to Good Game.
Thank you.
How does it feel that literally millions of people around the world are enjoying something that you've created?
Oh, I mean, it's great, but, you know, first of all, in reality, I'm just like one component of this huge team. You know, I just am like the figurehead that gets pulled out for the press and stuff, you know. But it is nice at the end of the day, especially having spent years on these creations. I probably get more enjoyment from what the fans do with my games as much as they get from the games themselves. Players using The Sims to tell stories and make movies and stuff, you can just tell, looking at some of these movies, that they poured, you know, tens, if not hundreds of hours into some of these creations. And, you know, for them, they don't think of it as a game anymore at all. They think of it as a movie creation system.
What's influenced or inspired you in your career?
Bruce Artwick, who did the original Flight Simulator, which was one of the first games that I really got kind of immersed in a virtual... It was just a simple wireframe world. Bill Budge, Pinball Construction Set, back on the Apple II, you know, was the first game I played that was really constructivist. And before that, it was like historical board games that I used to play, you know, as a teenager.
What was the first game you ever worked on?
It was my first game, right on Bungling Bay, released by Broderbund back in the early 80s.
And this inspired you when you were building it, is that correct?
Yeah, because in Bungling Bay, you were flying over these islands and bombing factories and stuff, and I had to create these islands. And I built an editor for myself where I could scroll around the world and put down roads and buildings, and I found that I was having a lot more fun building these islands than I was bombing them. And so after I finished that game, I kept playing with the editor and making it fancier and fancier, and started researching urban planning. And at that point, it was just a toy for me. It was my toy, And then I started thinking, hey, other people might enjoy this, and that turned into SimCity. I've always enjoyed making things. And when I first started doing computer games, I was building simulations on the computer, and I really enjoyed building them. And I was trying to think about how I could give other people kind of that joy of discovery, where they were actually building things. And so SimCity kind of came from that, where at first I was hard coding the simulation of a city, and then I started thinking about, okay, how can I make it so that anybody can build a city? When I was a kid, I spent most of my childhood building these models out of plastic and balsa wood and whatever. And those were interesting, and they would kind of develop the structure of something, but not the dynamics. A computer model allows you to now bring dynamics to whatever you've built, and now it comes alive, and you can see the internal processes that you're now modeling, as well as the external structure.
Did you ever think the Sim franchise would be so successful?
I thought it would either be a big hit or a giant flop, but I never thought it would be as big a hit as it ended up being.
Spore is sometimes described as a Wright museum featuring elements of other games that you've been involved in. Do you agree?
Well, Spore is a hybrid game with a lot of different genres. I don't think they're necessarily my genres. I mean, it's almost more the historical development of games. So the very earliest phase of Spore is very much like Pac-Man or one of these two-dimensional kind of maze games. The next phase is more like one of the early first-person shooters, and then like an early real-time strategy game. And eventually the space game feels more like a MMO or something. So I was actually very surprised when we initially announced Spore how many people kind of got the powers of 10 concept, even if they'd never seen Powers of 10, just the idea of looking at the universe from very small to very large, from the distant past to the distant future. There's that aspect of Spore, which is kind of the thematic side. On the personal side, Spore is really about creativity, where the player is kind of creating their creatures, their buildings, their planets, etc. And we've seen time and time again that when players are given tools that kind of amplify their creative abilities, they get really excited.
Now that you've created this evolution game, do you think you're any closer to finding the meaning of life?
In Spore, I want people to confront a lot of these kind of larger issues, larger than their life, type of thing when you're laying, on a summer night, looking up at the stars, everybody's mind kind of trips across these interesting questions. Is there life out there? Why are we here? Stuff like that.
What kind of research went into Spore?
I'd say 80% of it was probably scientific research about the subjects that we're covering in Spore. The remaining research had more to do with, I think, psychology of the players when they are put in a role of creating stuff and what they would tend to want to do with it. Because we're going to be doing a simultaneous release of this game into 21 languages. And the cross-cultural considerations are actually much higher than most people would imagine.
The Sims appeal to quite a wide age group. Do you think the same thing will happen with Spore?
Yeah, I think, and that's part of the design that we try to bring to it, is we try to say what stuff is not just, culturally independent, but also demographically independent, of age and gender. You see this in other forms of media too. Some of the very best movies and books were written for dual audiences. Things like Alice in Wonderland, for instance, or Wizard of Oz, that appeal to adults and kids for various reasons. So it's a multi-layered approach to entertainment. We're starting to see generational skipping things like the Wii, where all of a sudden, games are becoming accessible to much older people and much younger people because of the interface affordances. And also we're starting to see a few more games that have, deeper, more meaningful themes than the standard shoot 'em up. But it's happening slower than I would like to see, but it is definitely happening.
So where do you see gaming heading in the next 5 years?
Well, I think, we are seeing the rise of user-generated content across all forms of media. And I think in some sense games are leading that charge. One of the aspects of that, I think, is that games are inherently going to be malleable and customizable down to the individual level. So that your game looks very different than my game because it's learning about you. I think that's kind of one of the next levels, is games getting more intelligent and learning about the player personally, observing what they do. Because we have those technologies right now and we're not really using them. And I think games have the potential to get people very interested and involved in the world around them, which is why I do games that have some relevance to the real world. And I think they just haven't matured yet. If a game like The Sims or even Grand Theft Auto, which I really admire, have more open, free-form universes for the player to explore, be more expressive, then, I think people are taking that lesson in games. That, people want more creativity, more freedom inside of games, and have more unique individual experiences.
After 7 years, now that you're very close to the release date, are you scared at all?
I don't know, I enjoy it, so if I didn't enjoy it, it would be horrible, it'd be hell. But the fact that I enjoy it, I can't imagine doing anything else. So, I mean, there's some point at which I, really want to get done with it and then get on to the next thing. So that's the primary motivating factor for kind of getting it out the door for me. But I really enjoy, every aspect of working on it.
If you could start your career again from day one, is there anything you do differently?
No. I think history's too brittle. You can look back at your life at any point and, had I gone to lunch here instead of there, your life would end up in a totally different trajectory, right, So I would never want to touch that.
Will Wright, thanks for joining us on Good Game.
Okay. Goodbye, Australia.
Good game.
Chopper. To the chopper. Well, Army of Two for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 throws you into the messy world of private military contracting. You can play as either the wisecracking Salem or the hardened and just plain ugly Rios.
I'll be there.
As you blast, headbutt and smash your way from Iraq to Afghanistan, but only if you get paid. We reviewed the 360 version.
Focusing on teamwork and cover management, Army of Two is a step sideways from other squad-based games. If you don't keep an eye on your teammates' health and location, you're going to be spending a lot of time on your back.
Yeah, Jung, it's all about the cover system, and I kind of like not having to push a button or double tap an analog stick to get in and out of cover. Your guy just aims around whatever is in front of him. It's a refreshing change from traditional third-person perspective shooters.
There's a full arsenal of weapons for you to purchase, pimp, and upgrade, but there's limited sensitivity in your controls, so gamers that like to tweak their aim might be up against the wall here.
Yeah, but the loading time for such a simple menu when you upgrade and change your weapons is just way too long. We didn't really understand that. But there is nothing like a golden pimped-out shotgun.
By shooting a larger weapon and by shooting more, enemies will be more attracted to you and will focus fire on you. This gives your squad mate the chance to move forward, and vice versa, he can cover you while you move forward. It's a bit like the threat system in most MMOs.
There's not enough diversity in the enemies of Army of Two. You've got your standard goons, and there's a lot of them. The slightly tougher ones have more armor on the front, which means you need to flank them. So one person distracts and takes all the aggro while the other goes in behind and takes them out. Now, at first, I thought, this was a little bit tedious, but later on I really enjoyed this flank fest.
Try and sneak around behind them.
Squad-based games are a little bit hit and miss for me, Jung. I find either there's too many teammates and they're useless, or they're so important that if you don't put them in the right spot at the right time, everything just falls apart.
Yeah, I know what you mean, Badge, but Army of Two scales it down and it gets it right. There's no mollycoddling of your teammate. He can take care of himself.
Ah, yes, finally some AI that can headbutt some face without my help. I did like sending him ahead too, just to see if I could keep up. How did you find the single-player AI, John?
Surprisingly responsive. Your teammate takes cover effectively and he moves forward on your command. Of course, nothing can beat a human partner, but it's good to see they didn't skimp on the AI. Either way, you'll want to play it on a nice and hard setting, otherwise you'll only get about 7 or 8 hours out of the game.
Enemies take cover, lean, and duck unpredictably. Combat has some nice touches as well, like the back-to-back moments, using a shield, co-op sniping, physics-defying parachuting, and having to drag your fallen comrade to a safe position before you can heal him.
Yeah, I had to drag you a lot, Badge.
Hey, what can I say? I'm a shotgun kind of guy and it gets me into trouble. I also like going in for the close combat punch, but there's this weird moment where every time you do this, both you and the enemy stand up and awkwardly stare at each other for a moment while the game decides who wins.
Yeah, I noticed that too, Badger. Other games like Assassin's Creed use Dutch tilts and different camera techniques to hide these kind of delays.
Now, we couldn't test versus mode because the game isn't online yet, but we did team up for some split-screen co-op action, and it really feels like communication is key. If you're going to take this online, you're really going to want to have a headset. Now, Jung, when you came back from E3, I remember you were really excited about this game. Has it lived up to expectations?
Well, not completely. I was very excited about a few key things. The first was the heavy political message. You're supposed to be able to walk away from this game learning something about mercenary corporations.
We outperformed the military and achieved all our objectives flawlessly.
That's pretty much been completely removed.
Yeah, you didn't really learn anything about them, did you?
That's right. And also I was pretty excited about the unique gameplay elements, like the back-to-back thing. You were supposed to, it looks like you can do that at any time. Here we see it's very scripted. There was also a unique mini-game when you heal your teammate involving tampons, which is a real-life thing because tampons soak up the blood the best. Both players needed to be a part of the mini-game to complete it for him to be healed, but it's just been replaced with a progress bar.
Can we speculate on why these features aren't in the final game?
We really can't say. It could be too ambitious. of ideas towards the beginning of the project or not enough time, it's just too hard to say.
Final thoughts?
Well, at the end of the day, it's just another average duck and cover shooter with some good cooperative ideas. I'm giving it 6.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Yeah, I was expecting a bit more too. I mean, there's great potential here for some solid team-based puzzles, but they weren't there. Also, the story doesn't justify the killing spree that the characters embark on. There's still some fun to be had, though. I'm giving it 7 out of 10.
Good game.
So, gamers, did you guess the game for this week? It was Ikari Warriors, released into the arcades in 1986. The game's designer, Keiko Idu, was inspired by the Rambo films, massively popular at the time.
It was one of the first games where 2 players could play cooperatively as Ralph in red or Clark in blue. You had a limited amount of ammunition as well as power-ups to increase your arsenal. It was also the first arcade game to use rotary joysticks.
Next week, gamers, we go online with Frontline, Fuel of War.
Lux will be taking a look at an industry currently suffering from a massive skills shortage. Yep, it's game development, with Aussie companies finding it hard to attract people with the right skills and keep them.
And, love 'em or hate 'em, we have a look at the humble health bar. It's a classic game mechanic that's been used by more games than Junglist has had shaves. But where did it all start?
As always, jump on the forums and leave us your thoughts or ideas. Until then, gamers, Junglist out.
Bajo out.